Hi everyone, this is Lauren, your sewing buddy, and today I'm continuing my work on this Featherington inspired dress from the show Bridgerton. The dress isn't from the show, again, just inspired by. So the next step I need to do is add the waistband, which I am going to try to use some of this cabbage for. It's just probably 2-3 inch waistband when it's all done. And then once that's done, we can move on to the skirt. So just wanted to make sure that I have enough width on this, and it looks like it's exactly wide enough. So then it's a matter of cutting straight lines. And I'm going to be cutting 2 of these, one for the outside of the dress and then one for the inside. I don't want raw edges on the inside, you know how much I hate raw edges, but this is going to be a little too much gathering to deal with a French seam, so I'm going to use the inner waistband to take care of all of that. I do have some concern that the satin won't be strong enough to actually hold it all, but we'll see how it goes. While I'm cutting these, I'd like to mention that I'm considering starting streaming on Twitch. So if you have ideas for content you'd like to see, right now my big idea is just stitch and chat. So, you know, audience participation, and we'll talk a bit while I sew things. If you have other ideas, if you have feedback about this idea, let me know, and let's get back into this sewing adventure. I have both of my waistbands cut now, so it's just a matter of attaching them. So again, I'm doing one on each side. Front one will fold down like so, back like so. Just need to get this pinned in place. I would also like to mention that in the description you'll find links to my Ko-fi and my Patreon, and these will help me get more materials to sew with, because right now with a 2-month-old and with pandemic, it's a little bit tough to justify purchasing new fabrics or notions or anything. So right now I am working through the stash of fabric that I have. Unfortunately, that stash is plentiful, so I do still have a few projects in mind, mostly for wardrobe projects, like a walking skirt, a cute little vest dress, and some other things. But yeah, new fabrics to help out with new ideas would be amazing. And now that I have that pinned on, the back piece will go on like so after it's sewn together. And here we are at the sewing machine, where you can see just how bouncy this thing is. It's sitting on a Costco work table, so it doesn't have a very solid foundation, but my machine also just bounces a lot. But I am careful not to sew over the pins, because I've broken a few needles, gotten some pins stuck in the feed dogs. It's just not a good time for anyone at that point. And you may see that I am holding the fabric on both sides. This is not to stretch it, but only to help guide it in a straight line. I'm well aware that you don't want to pull and stretch your fabric as it's going through the machine. Now with that attached, I can put the other waistband on the inside, and this I'm just going to line up with the edge of the satin. I don't feel the need to pin this, I can just follow that line. The front one, because I had that lace in the way, I wanted to make sure that I had everything pinned in place so it could follow the line of the actual satin bodice easier. The edges of the lace I'm not going to worry about trimming, because it's all going to be enclosed by the waistband, and hopefully that'll add a little bit more stability. Again, we'll see how this all turns out. Now that we have a waistband done, the next step is going to be actually patterning out the skirt, which I've done a little bit of math here. We can go over the pattern that I'm using. I found online. There will be a link in the description. Here's an actual image of that pattern. And as you can see, it has the measurements on there. So I'm going to have to rework these measurements to work with my body. Their waist total was 43 inches, gathered down to 24 inches. and my waist is 37 inches. By waist, of course, I mean the underbust. So let's figure out what that needs to be. So what we need to say is that my 37 is to X as their, what was it, 24 is to 43. So then what we need to do is multiply 37 times 43, and then so that's 21, and then 28, 0, so we wind up with 15, what was it, 1591. And then that gets divided by 24, and that will give us X, which is 66.29 or 66 and a quarter. And then we can use that to figure out the dimensions of the actual pattern pieces, because we know that 43 is to 66 and a quarter, as these other dimensions are to whatever I need them to be. So again, we only have one variable in each one, so there's 7.5 divided by 43 times 66 and a quarter, essentially figuring out the percentage of that, which is that specific waist measurement on that piece. And then the other ones are 6 inches and 8 inches, so I will figure those out. And then for the hem on this is 112 inches altogether, so same story, 112 over 43, that's the hem to waist ratio, is the same as something to my 37. No, that's actually totally incorrect. The correct formula is 112 over 43 equals X over 66.25, the expanded ungathered waist, not the 37 gathered waist measurement. So, with that in mind, there's the new math written out, and so X then equals 172.5, that's my total hem measurement, and I can do the same thing I did above to figure out the proportions of this, which comes out to 40 inches, 24.5 inches, and 21.5 inches. And then the length, based on my previous measurements, is 48.5 inches at the front. And then let's see if I can make this work on the fabric. So I'm going to start with the front panel, which is on a fold. So I'm going to measure out where that waist measurement was, and probably realize that that measurement obviously would be gathered. I'm wanting this to be flat front because that's the style in Bridgerton, so now I have to rethink these measurements, which will take a little bit of brain power. And it turns out to have been a good thing that I realized that measurement situation before I cut anything, because with the length I have remaining, I do need to make sure that the front panel and the side panels can sit side by side. So what I did was measure the front of my underbust and take half of that measurement approximately, and I have about enough to do the hem of the side panel right next to the waist of the front panel. So that should work out well and leave me enough then to do the back panel, which has that little bit of a train on it, as you can see from the pattern itself. And having marked the waist measurement for both the front panel and the side panel, I'm now creating an angle in between, and that way I will have the hem also for both. So these are essentially just two side-by-side pieces. I do need to angle them a bit because the length does increase as it gets towards the back. And then for cutting it out, I am adding a little curve at the waistline because it does need to mimic the curve at the hemline so that everything stays a nice even length, or at least the length that I intend it to be, because angles and Pythagoras and all of that. But then with the front panel cut out, Then I just need to add a little bit of length to the side panel and round out that bottom, see exactly how much difference I can get away with adding, because I do still want to get a little bit of that train, even though it turns out I don't have the length that I need to do the full train. All of the math that I did earlier was absolutely pointless. In fact, the side panel that I'm cutting right now will actually, I intended this to be the back panel, but it's actually going to turn out to be the side panel because I wanted the back panel to have that nice straight selvage edge. But the way that the lengths worked out, I needed to cut the bottom part angled at either side to get that full length that I wanted. So yeah, all of that math from earlier, absolutely pointless. But I left it in because I figured it's good math for you to know in case you do come across an extant pattern that has just one size and you want to be able to scale it up for yourself. In any case, now it's time to move on to that back panel. And I'm getting as much length out of this as I can. So first I want to see what the overall length is. And then I'm going to see what angle I need to cut it at to get the width that I want at the waistline. Because I do want to do some gathering at the waistline. Really, it's a matter of getting that length with the minimal waist, because the sharper the angle from the waistline to the corner, the more length I will get out of it overall. I just need to make sure that I do have a curve at the bottom. That way it follows a nice train shape. And you'll notice there is a bit there where the fabric is sticking out at the bottom. I'm keeping that to use it as part of the waistline because that will get me a couple of extra inches of length, and then I can use that one for the back seam. Again, unfortunately, I don't get that nice straight selvage edge for the back. The back is going to be on a bias, but that means that it should stretch out if I hang it for a few days. We'll see. Needless to say, I'm not finishing this project this week, but we're going to push on through and see how far I can get. And what I've resolved to do is just match up the very bottom corner of this with the angle on that piece that sticks out, and that, I guess, will give me the optimal length at the bottom, best I'm going to get out of the fabric that I have. I know piecing is period. I could just tack a little bit of extra on the bottom, especially since I'm going to be covering the skirt with lace anyway, but I don't wanna. I'm gonna work with things as they are. Also, I still need to cut out a facing for the bodice, so I need some amount of scrap to do that with. So I'm just drawing that line to connect those 2 points. I'm leaving the bottom edge on this straight because I'm going to kind of adjust everything in post after the skirt's all put together, just to create the shape that I want from that and not worry too much about it overall. And the really nice thing about that is that it's just one straight cut up here, and then I can start assembling the satin layers of the skirt. The lace layer, of course, still needs to be assembled. But these are my 2 back panels. They'll meet in the middle, and then I've attached that to the side panel here along the selvage edge. So I'm going to do a French seam along that, and you can see there is a little bit where the tail hangs out because it's not meant to be the side panel, it's meant to be the back panel, but you know what? We have to make do with what we have. And so I'm sewing fairly close to the edge, within a 1/4 inch here, just to get those attached with wrong sides together, and then I'll trim it, flip it, and do a French seam, which is with right sides together. That way all the raw edges are enclosed. I know in the last video I was using those clips because I didn't want to put pins in the satin, but because this is going to be entirely covered in lace, I don't rightly care. the last one was also covered in lace, so I guess I just got lazy and didn't want to bother with those clips anymore. And you can see that I did have some shift in the satin. That's because of sewing a bias edge to a selvage or on grain edge. It was bound to happen, and I don't really have any puckering, so I'm not too concerned with it. Again, it will be lace covered. And now I've trimmed it down, I'm turning it inside out and sewing to enclose those raw edges. I should have pressed this. I hear you screaming at me. I decided that it was worth my energy more to kind of finagle the edges as I sew than it would be to pull out the ironing board and the iron, get that all set up, press it, put it away, because the ironing board takes up the space right behind my chair when I'm using it, so I'm not able to sew while the ironing board is out. So I have to make these choices for the sake of my spoons. And I figure, you know what, as long as it turns out to be a straight seam and it doesn't come apart and I don't have the frayed edges sticking out like I did in some of my first French seam attempts, then everything's fine. I got a nice close trim on the seam, so it's not going to be sticking out. The original seam was about 1/4 inch, basically right at the edge of the hole in the center of the foot, and this one I'm doing a little bit outside of that, so it's a little bit of a wider seam, not by too much, maybe a millimeter, but that way I'm sure there's no raw edge sticking out. And now I just wanted to show you how the front panel and the side panel that was originally going to be a back panel actually match up perfectly. I am super stoked about that. A lot of my worries have been alleviated here. And now it's time for the lace. So what I've done is marked the center point on the front panel so that I can create that sort of curtain skirt effect. Also, don't put your lace on top of your pin cushion because your pins will get eaten by it, and then you'll wind up with pins in your carpet, and then your spouse will be mad at you because you have a 2-month-old who may be crawling very soon because he's incredibly strong. In any case, I'm using the scalloped edge of the lace here to create the front border because it's a very pretty little scallop and I wanted to use it. It saves me having to hem, so that means that my entire panel width is going to be the entire fabric width because I'm going to gather it a bunch at the back. Same story as with the skirt itself. I'm going to keep the front flat and then do a lot of gathering on the back of it. And because I want this lace to be super present in the back, I'm going to gather it and then gather the satin itself once I attach it to the waistband. And what I mean when I say gather is actually tiny pleat because I can't be bothered with gather stitches. I know it's probably the same amount of effort or even less effort, but my brain works better with tiny pleats than with gathering. Also, I would do the gather stitches on the machine, and it's very hard to make sure that the 2 rows of gather stitches line up. And right there, I just hacked off the cabbage on the lace from lacing the bodice. That way I have a nice straight edge, well, straight-ish edge to pleat onto the skirt itself. Again, I'm just going to be pinning straight across here for a bit and then gathering once I get toward the back. Pleating once I get toward the back. I do have concerns about using this stretchy lace as an outer layer. I know it is going to succumb to gravity over time. I may need to rehem this a few times in its life. Again, I'm going to let the whole thing hang for a few days before I actually hem anything, so hopefully that will get the brunt of it. But now I've moved to the back so that I know how much I need to pleat. I'm doing very close together pleats here, and then I'll space them out as I get closer and closer to the front. I'm taking care not to actually stretch the fabric as I'm pinning it, because I do want it to just sort of fall naturally instead of having any weird pulls to contend with. I want it to try to act just like a regular lace instead of a stretchy lace. This was not a well thought out purchase when I got this lace, but I'm making use of it, and it's a Featherington thing, so it doesn't need to be perfect. I mean, if we take Penelope's fitting as any guide, I'll be fine. But now I've reached the part where the pins meet, and we are good to pin the other side. Except I forgot that before I can pin the other side, I need to cut off the length here. So I'm just going to kind of keep these edges together as I reach for the bottom and give myself a little extra wiggle room because, again, I have way too much of this lace. So I'm just going to do a rough hack and slash job across the bottom. And now for the fun part where I take this nicely curtained skirt and attach it to the waistband on the bodice. So once again, for that waistband, we have the 2 layers. I'm going to be attaching this to the outer layer first to make sure I get that nice and straight and pretty. And I should really press this down, but once again, that's a lot of effort to get out the ironing board and iron. So instead, I'm just going to attach these and press later and just make sure that all of my seams are very straight because that's going to make it easier to press later on. And I just need to find the center point on the bodice front and match that up with the center point that I marked here. And I'm doing this with right sides together because I'm not doing French seams. I'm instead turning these in on themselves, and it will all be nicely hidden. No raw edges for anyone. The center pinning on this is the easy part because everything is nice and flat there. Once again, though, when we get toward the back, I'm going to be pleating, and this is an already pleated lace, so it's going to be a little bit thick and a little bit of a challenge to pin through, but I am up for that challenge, and I think that this is going to turn out really nice and full and at least mildly interesting. And you can see here I went with the same tactic where I pin all the parts that I want to be flat, and then I move over to the back seam where I begin gathering very close together, and again I'll space those out once I get toward the front and start running out of slack. But yeah, I mean, as long as I can keep those pleats fairly straight, I think it's the look that I wanted, and I am very excited for next week when I pray to the gods that exist that this will be done. I had actually intended for this to be done this week, but that didn't work out because I've been on a cleaning kick, and then also, once again, we have a 2-month-old who has needs, and some of those only I am able to fulfill, and spouse is working, so that's my life right now, and we're all going to deal with it. Also, it would have been a much longer video if I'd gotten more done, so enjoy the little bit of a break between pieces. But now that I've attached the skirt to the outer layer, I need to attach it to the inner layer for the waistband. And I've sewn a line along here to match the seam allowance for the outer layer. So I'm just going to use that as my fold line as I pin. And I'm going to try to match that up with the stitch line from attaching the skirt to the waistband. This is going to be hand stitched, so I could do a stitch and chat, but I don't think I have that in me right now. Also, I really want this to, I want to get the reveal and the finale up as soon as I can, so I'm not going to make you wait another week for that. I'm going to get everything finished. And I am planning to do sort of a get ready with me for the finale, so I'm going to look up a Regency hairstyle to do. I'm not going to dye my hair red for this. I will do it probably for Costume College itself, which is going to be virtual this year, but they're doing sort of a Zoom get-together, I guess. So look forward to that. And this is as far as I got this week. So let me close this out by thanking you for joining me on this adventure. Uh, I'm looking forward to being able to share the finale with you and how this actually turns out. Obviously, it still needs closures up the back and to put that back seam together, and then, of course, the facing on the bodice. So I may just do those all in downtime, and then you can see the entire thing put together next week. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this, please hit the thumbs up like button. If you want to make sure you don't miss that reveal, please subscribe. And don't forget to check links in the description. My social media accounts are there as well. I look forward to seeing you next week, and go create beautiful things in the meantime.